From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Clinical Reviews, interviews and ideas about innovations in medicine, science, and clinical practice.
Hello, and welcome to this JAMA Clinical Reviews podcast. I'm Dr. Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo, and I'm the editor-in-chief of JAMA and the JAMA Network. I'm speaking today with Dr. Robert Califf, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. We're speaking about a special communications published in JAMA that Dr. Califf authored with colleagues titled, Why Evidence Generation Should Matter to Payers and How They Can Help. Welcome, Dr. Califf.
Thanks, Kirsten. Great to be with you.
Wonderful. So, why evidence generation should matter to payers? So, we're talking here about why this whole research enterprise that we have, all these trials that we do, should matter to insurers, people who are paying for healthcare. So, what's the general thesis that you're elaborating here with your co-authors?
Well, let me tell you how this particular article started. Part of my job is to go around to all the different people around Washington and around the country that have a stake in what the FDA does. And I was asked to speak at the America's Health Insurance Plan meeting, which is where all the big health insurance, not all of them, but a large number, convene. Their question for me is, why aren't you getting these follow-up trials done from the accelerated approval studies? It's out on the market, and then it takes forever to get the follow-up studies done. Of course, it doesn't take forever, and we could have a long discussion about that. So I did a little homework before going to the meeting, and when I called a bunch of doctors and said, what is the main thing that's keeping you from participating in clinical trials, and what are your biggest headaches? Clear and simple, the difficulty of dealing with what insurance companies are doing was seen as a major problem. Difficulty in assigning the costs of what's a research cost and what's a clinical care cost. Despite the mandate and the agreement, for the most part, to cover routine care costs, many clinicians report that that's not actually what's happening, that they're often experiencing denials and multiple rounds of frustration in getting their studies done. So we had quite a session where I said, wait a minute, why don't you help us get these studies done? Because after all, increasingly, physicians are not totally autonomous. They're working for organizations which are dealing with insurance companies, either federal or private. This particular article is oriented towards the private insurers and the powers that they have. So the general thesis, I guess, is kind of obvious, which is that if the purpose of health insurance is to pay for healthcare that keeps people healthy or makes them healthy if they're sick, then insurers should have an interest in having the evidence that's needed so they know they're paying for the things that are actually achieving that goal. And we go through in the article the reasons why we are lacking so much evidence now where the insurance companies could be helpful in getting that evidence.
So it started out like you knew they were going to come at you at this meeting, and so you were going to come back and throw it back to them, because certainly a reason why in clinical practice it's hard for clinicians like me to enroll my patients in trials, because it's just hard to take care of patients, and a lot of ways in which these coverage determinations create a disincentive. But insurers are really about, helping patients get their health care covered. Why really should it be in their interest to be involved in this other very different enterprise, which is about generating the evidence?
Well, let's see, right now we're paying $4.5 trillion a year for essentially the worst outcomes of any high-income country. So I don't know how else to say it, except they're obviously paying for a lot of stuff which doesn't work. And they're not paying enough to really stimulate the use of the things that do work. Other countries seem to be doing it much better. So I'm not saying that this is all the problem of the insurance companies. I'm just saying maybe they should really consider doing their part, in addition to everyone else needing to step up, which is a point that we make in the article. We bring up some examples like, who's going to pay for clinical trials where a less expensive therapy may be better than a more expensive therapy? Companies that make the more expensive therapies are unlikely to want to sponsor those trials. The NIH has a limited budget, and we give some examples where insurance companies have helped, and it's made a difference. And once you prove that the less expensive therapy is better or as good as the more expensive therapy, that seems like a really good thing for the insurance company and for the patients. That should directly bring down the costs. And we have other examples in here of things that insurance companies could do to make the evidence generation system better, and therefore they'll know better what they should pay for and what they should not pay for.
That's great. So that's a great example where the coverage decision that also would be the better health outcome decision, hopefully, answering the question is really in no one's interest except for the people who are paying for it, or at least they have the means to help incentivize the generation of evidence there. You also write in this piece about, and you've also talked about how the action of insurers does have an impact on the ability to enroll patients in studies. There's a lot of evidence in that sit with insurers. And also, one of the things that really intrigues me is just how much evidence we need after the FDA has approved a new drug. There's more evidence that we need over time, and some of that could come from systems that insurers really have a lot of influence over.
I feel like, in my second run as FDA commissioner, I really do feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding about the laws that govern the decisions that FDA make about allowing products to come on the market. The requirement is that you show that your treatment is better than nothing for at least one indication and at least one population. There's no requirement for comparative effectiveness, for determining the value, for even knowing necessarily how long the treatment should be given. This came up in today's Alzheimer's session advisory committee meeting. But that's, these are laws that are written. These are not, if I had my druthers, I might want to look at a lot of things that would be more interesting. But the people have spoken, Congress has written laws, and I think I'm biased, but I feel like the FDA does a great job of meeting that statutory requirement, requiring a high level of evidence that at least there's some benefit. And remember, 90% of drugs, for example, that get into phase 1 never make it to market because the evidentiary standard is high. But then there are all these questions left on the table that are crucial for clinical practice that you really need to know if you're going to make good decisions as a clinician, and that patients should know. But it's out of FDA's control. In some cases, we have statutory authority to require like follow-up studies for accelerated approval, but in most of those other situations, we don't have any legal authority to require those kinds of studies. And so it becomes sort of a tragedy of the commons. Whose job is it if we're all in some ways accountable as an ecosystem? And I know at JAMA, you've been working on a whole series on what to do about clinical trials. And I think that area, the post-market space, the integration of medical products with behavioral. This is another. We just had an advisory committee on MDMA.
Yes.
And a lot of the discussion and controversy was about how do you intertwine psychotherapy and how do you get the right psychotherapy to mix with a medical product? Well, FDA doesn't regulate the psychotherapy. And so we need an ecosystem, and the insurance industry is part of it, that works together to get the evidence that we need. That's our thesis in this article.
Yeah, it's really great. And thank you for submitting this as a part of this series. Randomization is such a wonderful tool to help generate the evidence. And we spend a lot on clinical research. And yet I sort of feel as a practicing clinician, there's still so many questions I don't know the answer to, even after I know this drug might be effective. But I don't know in which patient, for how long, in whom, how does it compare to the other therapies? And a lot of that is things that we would love to know the answer so we can make the best decision for an individual patient. How optimistic are you that insurers want to step into this space or can step into this space?
Well, how do I say this politely? I have a lot of friends in the insurance industry. I mean, we all get paid to do a job, and almost everyone who I know is in a position of authority and great knowledge feels like the system is out of kilter right now. But they have a job to do, and they try to do it well. So I think if everyone can give a little bit in this, I'd put the leaders of academic medical centers right up there now. And when I talk to clinicians, insurance companies didn't come out so well, but neither did the administrations of academic medical centers. I mean, to do a randomized trial and enter a patient, you've got to sit down and talk to the person and the family and go through the risks and benefits. That takes time. You don't get paid for it. And most young faculty that I've met who are really manning the clinics find themselves beaten up right now to generate more RVUs to keep the place afloat. So there's an intertwining of these different components. But there's another special role for insurance companies that we talk about, which is claims and HR data are getting better and better. And if we're going to simplify all this, make it less burdensome in practice to enroll patients, the insurance industry, by and large, the claims data have been very useful for a lot of things. But they can be even more useful. One example that I think is really important is the medical device identifier, which we're having a heck of a time getting that adopted in the claims forms. But it's just amazing to me that we still know more about the tires on your car than we do about your artificial hip, because unless we have that identifier, we can't track what's happening to you. And if there's a recall, we may not even know that you've got one of those hips that was recalled. So
can you say a little more about that? What needs to be changed? Because that seems important. I just had the tires changed on my car, so I know when they're there. So you perked my ears there for that. What needs to be changed here?
Well, there's a national plan to gradually get this, basically any device. And this, by the way, includes diagnostic tests too. People don't know it, but right now, the number that comes out of a diagnostic test, once it gets into cyberspace, it's often not attached to the metadata that would enable you to know what the correct interpretation of that number is. So any medical device should have a barcode with a number on it, which is the identifier that this is what it is, and here's the metadata attached to it. And it's gradually being rolled in. This may surprise you to hear, but one of the great opponents in 2016, we were working on this again, was the academic medical centers, who I would have thought would be most in favor. But these things are regarded as a burden. But you know from the work you do at JAMA that unless we have solid data, we're spending huge amounts of money on just trying to get simple things done that could be done very easily with better automation. And this is a place where the insurance companies have already been helpful, but they could be even more helpful.
So it sounds like there's reason to be optimistic. As you said, this is a complex ecosystem. It's not like the insurers are solely responsible. And thanks for calling out the academic medical centers as well. As I've been giving some talks about this theme of integrating clinical trials and clinical practice, one of the things that usually there's someone in the audience who stands up and says, our clinical American healthcare system is really messed up. So why are we trying to hitch this great research enterprise to something that is not working that great to begin with? How would you answer that question?
I would answer it by asking, what's the alternative? So first of all, I agree. The clinical delivery system, it is really hard to defend the American clinical delivery system as we watch our life expectancy now 5 years shorter than most of the other high-income countries and headed the wrong direction. But research should be done in practice for the most part. But it was different for me. I grew up as a heart attack researcher. You can't take a heart attack patient and say, why don't you come to the research clinic next month and we'll fit you in with an appointment. You have to do it as part of practice. I mean, again, I'll just point to the MDMA. I'm not saying anything about the results of the advisory committee. I'm just saying, if you're going to integrate psychotherapy with use of a psychedelic drug or any therapy, you need to do it in a setting which reflects the real world, or how are you going to know what the finding actually means when you go to apply it in the real world? So I don't see an alternative, but I'm certainly not arguing that we ought to keep the clinical delivery system the way it currently is. It needs to be fixed. That, maybe fortunate for me, is not the FDA's bailiwick. But I also feel like our little part of it, since we are responsible for the safety and effectiveness of medical products as they're used in practice throughout their lifespan, we've got to be vocal about this whole expansive area, the post-market space, where we don't have control, but we can see a lot of things, and we can see how it could be made much more rational if everyone played a stepped-up role, including us. I'm not saying the FDA knows everything and is perfect here. We got some work to do, too.
Okay, we all have to be doing a little bit better. And as you said, there isn't another alternative. We all have to be doing a little bit better in this system. And certainly, I'm sure you would agree, evidence matters when it comes to trying to make these improvements. And if we can do this together, that would be helpful. Well, thank you very much for having this conversation with me. You've had a busy week at the FDA, one of many weeks that are busy, I'm sure. But thanks for sharing this special communications and taking time to talk about it, and also put it in the context of the other things that the FDA is considering this week.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'll just leave you with a thought. It's a conundrum. When I go around the world talking about the FDA, people are in awe. The United States is developing the technologies and innovations that are driving healthcare all around the world. And yet, when we go to apply those technologies, we're basically the worst. So I could say, well, the FDA is doing its job. What's wrong with everybody else? But let's don't think of it that way. Let's say we got to figure out not just how to develop new technologies for others to use, but how do we deploy them for Americans so that we get the benefits so many other countries are experiencing.
Wonderful. So well said. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with Dr. Robert Califf, the commissioner of the FDA, on his new special communications published in JAMA, Why Evidence Generation Should Matter to Payers and How They Can Help. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. Thanks for listening.